Without today, there would be none of this. No exuberant music by Richard Shepherd, no Handel's Messiah, no African spirituals, all of which we have heard during these 3 days here in the cathedral. And more than that, but for today there would have been no Martin Luther King, no Florence Nightingale. And why no Florence Nightingale? Because that instinct that she personified to care for those in need, even the unrich and the unimportant in the world's eyes, those virtues we have celebrated in our own health service this past year of pandemic. Those virtues we may regard as natural, but which are anything but. Without today, those virtues would have lived on in the rich humanitarian tradition of our Jewish brothers and sisters in faith. But we would have learned them by a quite different route, and we might have failed to learn them at all. And the teaching of Jesus, even those parts that are admired by sentimental atheists who reject the Christian account of reality but applaud Christian values, but for today, that teaching would have stayed and probably faded away in one small patch of the Middle East. Easter Day, all that burst from it and spread even as far as this small offshore European island, the Easter eruption has formed much of the reality that you and I now inhabit. But what is this volcanic moment for which I am making such enormous claims? There is a riot of variety in the Easter stories, and we have heard some of them in the services in the cathedral today. At dawn, we heard Mark's Gospel tell how the women go to the tomb and don't see Jesus at all, but are told that he has been raised and gone ahead of them. We heard later on John's Gospel tell how Mary Magdalene lingers at the tomb and meets Jesus, but mistakes him for a gardener. And soon, John's Gospel goes on to say, Jesus will appear to some of his male disciples, apparently materializing in the room where they are hiding, and much later will appear again and take Peter back to the dark night of his betrayal of Jesus and promise him that he has a future. And now, in this service's second reading, Luke's Gospel tells how 2 disciples walk to a village, and a stranger, so it seems, falls in with them as they go. What sort of figure is it who is solid and physical, but who can appear and then vanish at will? And who on one occasion is known at once, but who can remain unrecognised throughout a long walk? Now, the Gospels as we have them were written over 30, perhaps well over 30 years after the events. So this is not raw data straight from the scene. But would you not expect the passage of time and the labours of the authors to deliver a clear, worked out account of this, the event that launches Christian faith upon the world? We all know how important it is to get your message clear and straight. We knew that long before the mad men of the advertising world brought us their particular wisdom. But what we get here is a marketing headache, a jumble, a kaleidoscope of stories, inconvenient for a clear message, inconvenient but compelling. And as people had asked of Jesus himself in his ministry, so we now ask of these stories, where did all this come from? Another principle of good advertising is to mix the novel with the familiar. You can see how they might tell a story about Jesus ascending into heaven. There were already other stories like that. But there is nothing in the Hebrew scriptures quite like these Easter scenes. These stories suggest dazzled, confused people trying to put into words experiences for which nothing had prepared them, not their own Jewish faith, not even the teaching of Jesus himself. And these are not the only stories around. St. Paul, writing long before any of our gospel writers, tells us what had first been passed on to him, that Jesus died for our sins, that he was raised from the dead, that he appeared to Peter, then all 12 disciples, and then, he says, was seen by 500 of the faithful at once. What was that about? Paul says some of them are still alive at the time of his writing. So the gospel writers give us a selection of these stories that can be believed or not, that can be interrogated, but that cry out to be heard as an act of witness. Something happened when the friends of Jesus saw him die and thought that they and all things were lost. Something happened, and it was something like this, or like this. And they choose these stories, I think, because there is something about each one that will be useful for those who follow. It's not that experiences just like this are always going to be part of the package of Christian faith, but they show us different men and women looking to Jesus to find themselves again and be found again. And each does, according to each one's particular need. Peter failed Jesus. He needed to see he was forgiven. Mary Magdalene had lost the person she loved. She needed to know that the ache of loss was not the last thing she would feel in this life. And this evening, the pair of disciples we meet on the road, they have a rather modern problem. They are disappointed with God. Jesus has let them down. We thought, they say, he was the one who would redeem Israel. So they need not pretense that the world is fine when it isn't. They need assurance that this is how it has to be for now, but God will succeed in doing what God has been working so long to achieve, because God's energies to mend and remake and renew are inexhaustible. How will he meet me or meet you? It depends on what you and I need. Easter, a season that lasts 50 days, in which God invites each of us to bring the stuff of our lives, especially those parts that have gone dead, where you feel like the people of Israel in the prophecy of Ezekiel we heard about. And haven't we felt like them for much of this year when they say, our bones are dried up? Bring those feelings into the presence of God, who raised Jesus from the dead. Bring your need to be forgiven, Bring the ache of loss. Bring your disappointment with God. And may Jesus meet you, not to abolish all the ills of the world immediately, but to make your heart burn within you as you walk with him along the way.